So this is the 25 April update. Still pending a final RFP, but maybe we'll see something this week. So we just wanted to take a few minutes and cover some additional preps that people can do, and also just talk through some of the questions that have come up from different situations over the last 2 weeks. So for today, again, still waiting for that final solicitation. We'll go through our admin updates, talk through the opportunity, dive into our weekly topic, which is a kind of a follow-on from the last webinar's conversation. And then obviously if there's any Q&A, we can take those. So
Okay.
I am Rebecca Wayland. Ada Stanford Berry has also joined. She's one of our Trident analysts. She's running OASIS Plus for some of our other clients. We are still updating the OASIS Plus Information Hub. One of the things that we're going to update here soon are the Symphony tags, but that's going to be a little bit contingent on what GSA sets as the standard tags, because it varies based on the platform instance what they want us to use. So I do expect that they will give us at least a list of 6 or 7 must-use tags, and then we'll have some discretion to create our own. And then if the proposal does not come out this week, we will put up another updated calendar, but there is kind of a recommended schedule up there that breaks things out in a phased way for the next couple weeks. And then haven't seen any questions or issues with from a tech side of accessing things. So obviously, if you do run into any of those issues, just shoot me a note and we'll get you plugged in. This is all stuff that we covered last time, so I'm going to go through this a little bit quickly. Still expecting something on or before 29 April, if you believe their 30-day timeline. We know that they're processing those questions and the updated comments that they got, even though they did not solicit anything from that second draft RFP. So I know they're trying to do their best to maintain their timeline, but also avoid protests and pre-award challenges. So we do still expect that 90-day turn, though, once they release the final RFP. And so what this could look like is, now obviously we're at the 25th. If nominally we got something by the end of this week on the 27th, we would recommend using all of next week to kind of take a deep breath, reassess projects, make sure nothing fell out of eligibility, get forms prepped, and finalize the projects that you want to use. But don't worry about sending the forms out until at least the second week in May, if not the third, just to kind of give GSA time to make sure that they're not going to amend anything. And then obviously any amendment that they make could drive a change to what you are doing in terms of how you fill out the form. We think there'll be about a month between when the solicitation's released and when questions are due. So we'll be keeping an eye on that. And then obviously we have some holidays between now and anticipated submission. So between Memorial Day, Juneteenth, and the 4th of July, there's 3 fewer work days to deal with. So thank goodness we have that 90-day turn. And then, as we discussed on the last webinar, you'll be sending out the forms, but requesting them back, giving your clients no more than about a month to fill them out. Because it's one of those things where if it doesn't get done in the first 2 weeks, the odds of it happening in the next 2 weeks without a reminder are kind of slim. So just making sure that you can send things out, send out a reminder, get everything back by early June so that you've got the rest of June and July should you need to adjust your strategy, right? If something comes back and doesn't earn the credits that you thought it was going to earn, or if the customer wants to have a follow-on conversation about why something qualifies or should accrue points in a designated category, you've got the room to have that conversation. If you're using any subcontractors or teammates, making their forms due back right around the same time, just so that you can make sure everybody got signed what they needed to get signed in the areas that it needed to be signed in and nobody went rogue. And then carving some time out for another record check and supporting volume check, right? Making sure there's been no additional instance of CPARs that have been issued or an FPDS record, because we know there's a 90-day lag at least in the financial recording there. So for any mods, for any ongoing contracts, we just want to make sure we take a time out before final submission or before we're in the final month to adjust there. And then using really July to do your pre-upload reviews, your final compliance, make sure everything is, all the I's are dotted, T's are crossed, and everything says what you think it's going to say, so that you can build the proposal kind of as you go in Symphony and you're not trying to upload everything in the 11th hour. So the good news is once you have all of your documentation for a single project aggregated, it's a pretty easy update in Symphony. What takes time is doing a screen share and going file by file and having to, open. Basically, what you have to do is re-download the documents, open them up, and then make sure everything's tagged where it ought to be between your company profile and the actual proposal submission, because there's two sections of the submission platform Symphony that you're going to need to be familiar with. So we'll be able to help you with all those, and we'll be uploading training videos and how-to guides as we go once they open up that portal. And then if this proposal comes out this week, we think that proposals would be due that final week of July. So just kind of planning for having everything uploaded and submitted a couple days in advance, because hopefully we're not waiting on anything to change in that last week. And then again, you would be able to pull that proposal back if you needed to. There's always a kind of an undo, or take it out of submission mode back into edit mode before the final deadline elapses. So just kind of pacing ourselves throughout this process, doing a lot of the legwork up front in terms of the project down selects and documentation prep. But hopefully there's not a lot of unknowns by the time we're rolling into the end of May, early June. Okay, so weekly topics right now. I did want to go and do a little bit of a deep dive into integrated experience, because there's been some questions that I've seen on draft JP3s and how people are filling these out. So this section pertains to the scorecard where you get additional credits for showing that your qualifying project demonstrates performance across multiple functional areas. And something that's really important to understand here is that they have used the term domain and functional area interchangeably. And they confirmed this both at the top of the JP5 functional area form, as well as in the Q&A. So they've said, yes, if we say domain, that's the same thing as a functional area. And where the confusion is that for most of the domains, the exceptions are facilities and environmental. For most of the domains, they're actually looking for you to find services in your contract that align to multiple domains. So they want to see some management and advisory type services. Then they want you to select some research and development type services, or technical and engineering, or one of the other categories. Enterprise services is kind of its own thing. We'll talk about that in a minute. But it's not selecting like 6 things from this list of management and advisory types of tasks. It's selecting tasks or functions across multiple areas. So you're not going to get credit if you tag information analytics and business consulting and program documentation as part of your statement of work. That's not going to qualify as getting credit for those distinct functional areas, because they're all in one functional area. I mentioned facilities and environmental are a little bit different. We'll look at the language there in a minute, but just so everybody's on the same page with terminology, domain equals functional area. Okay, then the other important thing to note about these integrated functional areas is that for the purpose of integrated experience, remember there's that whole section of the JP5 that talks about planned future domains. So it's things like finances. I think there's IT in there. There's some medical services, or kind of the consulting in that form. Those are all planned areas for OASIS Plus to eventually expand into. So they're not current domains, but those are considered legitimate functional areas that you can show performance in to get credit for this integrated experience section. So those additional functional areas and sub areas, and it starts with section 2 in the JP5 document, those all count. So if you figure that by the time you've got a relevant qualifying project, you've already taken credit for one functional area, and all you have to find are 2 other types of tasks, there's no threshold right now. It doesn't have to be, $25K worth of work or $150K worth of work. It just has to show that you did work that aligns to these other service areas. You should be able to get credit for that. So obviously we're keeping a very close eye on that between the second draft RFP and the final solicitation, just in case anything changes. But as it is right now, this should be a decent area to try and pursue credits if you're doing any kind of complex services. So, because usually there's a program management element, there's usually a documentation section. There might be financial reporting. IT is something that gets wrapped up into a lot of contracts. And the one distinction that you're going to want to make sure you understand is that complying with IT requirements is not the same as performing IT functions. So if you just have the standard contract language that says, oh, and you have to make sure that your networks are all secure in accordance with cybersecurity standards and risk management framework, accountability processes and things like that, that's not the same as providing IT type support. So definitely make sure you understand what you were asked to comply with and what you were asked to perform is kind of the best way I can help you understand the difference in those two. So in most cases, if it's in the task area and says, contractor shall within the specific tasks, you're probably going to be able to take credit for it. If it's in a terms of the contract, not so much. And again, you do have that JP3 to help you establish anything that isn't abundantly clear in your documentation. And we are definitely recommending for everybody that you should just be prepared to prep and get a JP3 signed because it only helps your case. It's kind of the catch-all for any of these credit areas that may not be able to stand on their own. So if you don't have something that's black and white in the documents, it's great to get third-party validation, which is basically what that client is doing, is they're saying, yeah, we concur with the claim that they're making. And, oh, by the way, it is entirely possible that GSA could kind of adjust their strategy on this like they did with Polaris and all of a sudden make it mandatory that anything not claimed on an FPDS report requires a JP3. It would not surprise me to see that update. So we're just encouraging everyone to be prepared to get a signature, whether or not they need it based on the current standards of evidence. Okay, I mentioned this earlier, but there is different language in this integrated section for enterprise, facilities, and environmental domains. So enterprise, remember, that only applies to the unrestricted domain. And within that one, in order to get credit, you're not looking for, you have to span 5 or more distinct functional areas. And so again, those additional areas count for enterprise services. So you have a lot to work with, but really the whole point of the enterprise services domain is to show these really complex, broad service contracts. So it stands to reason that in order to get extra credit for those, you'd need to demonstrate a slightly higher threshold of your breadth of experience across multiple functional areas. And then there's an additional credit if all of the QPs combined demonstrate performance against 8 or more functional areas. So this is the one pool in which if you're submitting a bid in this unrestricted track and you've got enterprise service contracts, if you can show in the aggregate that you have nearly all of the domains covered, then you get an additional credit for that. So you won't get credit if all of your projects only focus on, let's just say, for instance, M&A, R&D, T&E, and IT services. If those are the only 4 that you can claim across all of your projects, you're not going to get this credit. If you can expand it to 8, then you're back in the running for this additional credit. The only thing to keep in mind here is that there is still a category maximum. So I always like to point that out when people are running their scorecard, because as they're trying to scan their projects and figure out which projects are the best ones, quote unquote, to submit, just know that it may or may not be worth your effort to go chase points if by virtue of the documentation on other projects, you're already maxed out in the category. So 4 credits is kind of where most of these integrated experience credits peak. So if you're using 5 projects, obviously there just might be a trade-off there. So for the facilities domain and for the environmental domain, these are the 2 exceptions where the list of services that you need to be able to show for those sub areas or that functional area, that is contained just in that facilities list or just in that environmental list. They're not interested in you showing experience for M&A and T&E and R&D as it relates to this specific credit or this line on the score sheet. Those do need to happen or do need to come from that bulleted list, which again is not all inclusive, but it's indicative of the type of services that you'd be providing. And there's some additional criteria, some scoring criteria in the environmental and the facility services domain, where if you're doing specific types of, say, building maintenance or facility upkeep, like HVAC, if you're doing, 3 of 5 of those, and there's a list of items, then you might be eligible for more credits. So I know this doesn't apply to everybody, but I just pointed out because it is a point of divergence across the different domains. And one of the reasons it's so important to get into the specific score sheet for the domain that you are pursuing. Okay, moving along. This came up briefly on the last webinar. So the subcontracting plans, this is an area that we've seen a lot of change in across the drafts, and as this solicitation has been assembled here. So again, another area for sure to watch between the second draft RFP and the final solicitation is what's going to be required for bidders as it relates to an individual subcontracting plan. So as it stands right now, if you are submitting in the unrestricted domain or the unrestricted proposal track, and you are a small business, you're not currently required to turn in an individual subcontracting plan. These are only required for other than small businesses. But a couple things that I do want to draw your attention to here. So if you are in other than small business in any of the NICS codes within the proposed domain that you're pursuing, you do have to provide this individual subcontract plan. The other thing to note is that they are not accepting commercial or master subcontracting plans. They want to see an OASIS specific subcontracting plan that lists out your percentages. And then they've got this great paragraph that describes what your goals should be or what you need to take into consideration when you're building your goals. And I've highlighted the words here, right? So they want you to have realistic goals that are attainable based on your individual circumstances. But do keep in mind, you should give the goals that they have set strong consideration, because what you have to do at the end of the day is make sure that your goals are not too pie in the sky, right? They have to be realistic, but they also can't be, they need to be challenging. So challenging yet attainable, which is kind of this, if you're somebody that deals with individual subcontracting plans a lot, this is probably not an area of concern. But if you're new to this game, this language definitely, you kind of gave me pause the first, 12 times I read it. I was like, okay, so you want it to be hard, but not too hard. But if I don't have to name who I'm going to team with for each of these socioeconomic categories, and I'm a business that's just graduated to being an other than small business, how are you really going to evaluate this? So this is it's an area to watch, right? And I think GSA might be willing to have a conversation if, to do a little bit of a litmus test closer to award or even after award. But just keep an eye on this, because we did see a significant jump in what the GSA goals were going to be for OASIS Plus between the first and the second draft. So instead of being, 22% set aside for small business, it jumped to 50% in the unrestricted track. So we did see a pretty big shift there. But yeah, this Q&A here applies, number 282. I just highlight that this is to confirm that right now, on the unrestricted domain here, or unrestricted proposal track, not domain, because the domains are the functional areas, all offerers, not officers, that are other than small business shall provide this individual subcontracting plan. So they went back and forth. They had language in there before about a DoD subcontracting plan, and could you use that instead? And what about if it's been approved by DCMA? And they've removed all of those caveats, and they said, look, just build us an individual subcontracting plan that is tailored to OASIS Plus. So that is the current guidance. And yeah, just make sure it's Goldilocks, right? Not too hard, not too easy, realistic for you, but also in line with OASIS's goals. And then right now, this is not really an evaluated area on the scorecard. It's a pass fail. Like, make sure you submit it and are complying with the intent here. So I suspect we'll see more dialogue around how they're going to look at this, what's going to be evaluated, and when the conversations are going to take place. But if you propose something that is in line with GSA's goals, you're probably not going to make any waves in a bad way. So more to follow, I am sure.